I'm Will Johnston, the Executive Director and founding CEO of Tiny House Atlanta, and we have two awesome people plus me talking about the tiny house villages and communities that we're building in our respected areas. So I'm gonna have Jeremy start. Jeremy Weaver is from Wind River Tiny Homes in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I was gonna make this awesome, amazing story of how I met Jeremy, but literally I just called him on the phone. So I was gonna say something like traversing the Himalayas or something, and I sprained my ankle and he carried me down or something, but you know, that would have been a good story. Maybe I'll put that on my blog, which I don't have. So anyway, so Jeremy Weaver is building a tiny house village on wheels in Chattanooga. And then Kim Puchero and I are building a tiny house community in East Point on Foundation. So we're going to be talking to those projects and just what we've come across, and we just want to educate and have you all be aware of what we're doing. So I'm going to let Jeremy start. So take it away. He's tall.
Ooh, that's great. Thanks. How many of you guys have heard of the Hair Club for Men? Seen those old commercials? You know, like I'm not only the president, I'm also a client. That's sort of my story of how I got into tiny houses. Originally, I wanted to build way back in 2014, my wife and I wanted to live in a tiny house. And I'm someone who, I can't just ask someone's advice on how to do something, I have to become an expert in the thing that I'm doing. So, basically fell off, searching tiny houses fell off the end of Google. By the time I fell off the end of Google, felt like, and my background is construction, so that helped a little bit. But by the time, I had done all this research, I was like, I feel like I know a good amount about tiny houses now. At that point, there wasn't a lot of people doing it. And that sort of led from researching building my own tiny house into starting a tiny house construction company with a friend of mine, Travis Pike, just outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so we started, I built my tiny house on Tiny House Nation, if you've seen that TV show. It's the second season called The Nomad's Nest. And my wife and I built it on that show. From the time that we decided to start the company and we wanted to build a tiny house and I purchased my trailer, to when we were building the house on the show, was 3 weeks. So that all happened, and it was like, okay, we're gonna do this. Oh, we've got a trailer. Oh, we've got a house now. It's sort of I'm someone who I tend to do first and then ask forgiveness later. So as a lot of tiny house people tend to be. And so that I've been building tiny houses now since 2014. We built about, I think, 15 or 16 tiny houses. Most of them on trailers, some of them on permanent foundations in the Chattanooga area. And really love it, love what I do every day. You wear 15, 16 different hats, when you're in an industry that's like the tiny house industry and is just kind of getting its feet under it. And especially in a small company, it's incredibly fun. That's our tiny house, and I do live in a tiny house, 276 square feet. I've been in almost 2 years now with my wife, a dog, and we have one on the way. So, and I'm 6'6", so if you're worried about can I fit in a tiny house, yes, you can fit in a tiny house. If I can fit in a tiny house, it's not going to be a problem, I promise. So that brings me to kind of the community thing. And so from the beginning of the company, Travis Pike and I, who founded Wind River Tiny Homes, talked about community, and what an intentional community of tiny homes could look like, could be, what it could, the kind of cool experience it could be for people who live in the community, and talked about lots of different variations of what a tiny house community could be like. And so it was sort of always this, from the initial, we want to build tiny houses, we need a tiny house community to put these things in, was always kind of hand in hand for us. And we got really busy building tiny houses, and the community part of it sort of, took a back seat to the building of tiny houses. So fast forward to the beginning of this year, 2016. There's a really awesome nonprofit in Chattanooga called Causeway. You can look them up, causeway.org. And essentially why they exist is to empower local Chattanoogans to solve Chattanooga's toughest problems. They do that in a variety of ways. One of which is they've just started offering a yearly fellowship, which essentially, if you're someone that's got a really good idea that addresses a need that Chattanooga's face, you can pitch them your idea and apply for a fellowship in Chattanooga to essentially be paid for a whole year to solve your idea. And so a light bulb went off. I didn't have the time, I didn't have the resources, to solve this tiny house community challenge. And when I saw this fellowship, I was like, this is something I've been wanting to do. I see affordable housing in Chattanooga and lots of places is a huge problem. And pitched them the idea, they loved it, and so that's essentially what I've been working on, is working out a way to get tiny houses legalized in Chattanooga for most of this year. And that's I won't get into the details of the journey that I've been on. Initially, the vision, the end game, is to get a tiny house community on wheels as close to the urban downtown as possible, because there's a lot of people interested in living in tiny houses, and there's a place for tiny houses on permanent foundations, and I think there's a lot of people that works better for, honestly. There's also a place for tiny houses on wheels, and there's a lot of people that a tiny house on wheels will work better for in terms of their lifestyle. And I'm a believer that if you're doing things smartly, you're doing things in a safe way, and you're trying to abide by the law, that you should be able to build a tiny house on wheels and be able to live in it and do it legally. So essentially, the grand vision was a tiny house on wheels community in the downtown. What we've sort of pivoted to in Chattanooga is a tiny house on wheels, using them as accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, if you guys have heard that. And sort of the thought process is that accessory dwelling units are a really low-hanging fruit for tiny houses in terms of increasing housing density and affordable housing. Accessory dwelling units, if you think about how many houses are in, just say, the greater Atlanta area that have large enough backyards to put a tiny house as an accessory dwelling unit in their backyard. I don't know the number, but you can increase housing density way more efficiently by putting tiny houses in a backyard than by having communities all over the place. And I do think there's a place for tiny house communities. I think that in lots of situations it can be a really cool thing. A few of those examples where maybe a tiny house on wheels community would make sense in an urban location, where maybe a permanent foundation tiny house community would make sense. One of those would be on a lot that's unusable for another purpose, either because it's so small or because it's oddly shaped, or something of that nature. Another thing is that I'm looking at in Chattanooga is utilizing brownfield sites. If you're not familiar with what a brownfield site is, a brownfield site is essentially you can't build permanent structures there for one reason or another. There's lots of different things that get classified as a brownfield site. Sometimes it's soil contamination, sometimes it's groundwater contamination. There's lots of different things like that. And in Chattanooga, there's a ton of brownfield sites. And the thought process is, a lot of times the problem with putting a permanent foundation house on a brownfield site is that if you disturb the soil, say, the contaminants are 6 feet down or 10 feet down, or in the groundwater, 15 feet down. If you disturb the soil, then you have to remediate that brownfield site, and you have to spend, sometimes millions of dollars remediating that brownfield site, and it makes it not feasible to build on those kind of the sites. But if you have a tiny house on wheels that's not on a foundation, you can use tiny house on wheels as a way to increase housing density in an urban location, and also at the same time utilize brownfield sites that would be able to be used for other things. So that's some of the things that we're playing around with in Chattanooga. And I guess I just want to, if you're interested in living in a tiny house, if you're interested in living in a tiny house community, there's a bunch of things I've learned, but there's kind of 3 key things that I would say that you need to remember and get really good at. And one is becoming a student of tiny houses, and that means learning about the type of systems that your tiny house is going to use, learning about the type of foundation options that you have if you're going on wheels or if you're off wheels. Learning as much as you can about tiny houses. And I think getting someone in your corner that knows that stuff already can also be a really good way to go for some people. A second thing would be to be the squeaky wheel. So we're at a place in the tiny house movement where there's enough people interested and there's enough people calling, their local governments and their city RPA, the building codes guys, that people are starting to realize that this is a big thing that they need to address. And so, that's if you're persistent and you're the squeaky wheel, eventually, there's gonna be legal ways to live in permanent foundation tiny houses and tiny houses on wheels everywhere in the U.S. And I think that's the way it's going to go eventually. And the third thing is to, it's really learn how to engage people in a positive way. So building codes officials, sometimes they're a pain to work with as a builder, but they're people just like I'm a person, and they might watch Tiny House Show and think it's a really cool thing. And if you engage them in a way that's positive and that's you're not trying to skirt the system, you're just wanting to honestly, how do I do this legally? I think it's something that should be done. I really want to do this. How do I do this? And going at it with that attitude goes miles. I can tell you, like if you're just this positive presence and you're calling them every week, asking them, how can we make this legal, working, you're just kind of always pushing the ball and you're keeping a smile on your face. It's possible to change zoning codes, and most of the people I've interacted with in Chattanooga have been awesome. I mean, they will have their questions, but in most cases, it's just a matter of that they need to be educated a little bit. They really don't know what you're trying to do. They don't know that there's a huge desire and there's a huge need for tiny houses. So anyways, that's the three things that I'd say just leave with you. If you're trying to do this, persistence pays off. And I can't stress enough, be a student of tiny houses. If you want to live in a tiny house yourself, learn out everything you can about it. I think my assessment is that in 5 years, there's going to be a lot of places where you can legally live in a tiny house in the United States. So.
So to introduce myself again, Will Johnston with Tiny House Atlanta. What Jeremy what he was talking about too, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I just want to say this. You don't have to be an expert to do something amazing in your community. So I just want to let that sink in. You don't have to be an expert. I am not a builder. I am not an urban planner. I am not an architect. I am a person who worked in corporate America 2 years, who quit his job and didn't know what to do with his life. And right now I stand in front of you organizing an amazing festival with over 3,000 people trying to get into a tiny house at the same time. So if you want to do something, Jeremy was right, have that positive attitude and make a difference. I'm Will Johnson, Executive Director of Tiny House Atlanta. I started this 2 years ago. I'm proud to say we are the largest tiny house group in the nation. We have over 1,400 members. On meetup.com, I'm sure we have a number of more today. And this is Kim Buchero.
Hi, I'm Kim Buchero. I joined Will about 1.5 years ago. I just came to his meetup group, and this is a passion project for me. I'm just a tiny house enthusiast. No experience with tiny houses before this, and again, I think together we're trying to make a really big difference, so talk more.
So before we go in, we're talking about our community, I want to talk about the word community. So right now, we as a neighborhood, a community, a group, we're contained. We live in our houses, we've got our media rooms, we've got our Netflix, we've got everything we need in our houses, and we don't talk to anyone. I'm just saying in general, don't quote me. But we as a society have gotten away from being an actual neighborhood, being an actual village, being connected to each other. Why do you think all this hate is happening? We don't know each other. We're afraid of each other. If we actually met our next door neighbor and was comfortable asking for a cup of sugar, like it was in the 40s and 50s, I guess. That's what they say. I don't know, I was not alive. But it's that whole idea is, why don't we know each other? Why are we afraid to get to know each other? So it's talking about building a community. And right now, being able to take this concept of tiny homes and make intentional communities, whether it be pocket neighborhoods, whether it be tiny houses on wheels, whether it be tiny houses on foundation. It's about getting back to being less space and have more life. Know your neighbors, know who you want to be, know you have the time to do the things you want to do. So this is the stuff. This is why I exist right now. This is why I'm doing this. I want to make sure people have the ability to go be who they are. They don't need that giant 4,000 square foot house to be who they are. They need a space they call their own that they feel very comfortable with. So when we talk about community, it's an amazing thing. An intentional community of like-minded people who want to live small but have a giant impact on who they are and their lives. So Kim and I are very excited to work on this next project. Go ahead. And I'm going to let Kim talk to it.
So we're excited to announce we have partnered with Jim Chapman Communities, Jim Chapman Fine Homes, to build the first tiny house community in Atlanta. So it will be, I'm sorry, I'm a horrible speaker, so I apologize in advance. No dancing. So it will be in East Point. We're calling it the Eco Cottages at East Point, and basically it's going to be a number of 40 to 50 houses on foundation, not on wheels this time, that are located on a 7-acre tract in historic downtown East Point. So we really just started this a couple months ago. We ran into Mary Bairstow, who is a real estate agent that works with Jim, and she connected us. They were excited about the tiny house movement. They saw our house at an event. We connected, and the stars have been aligning for us, and so we're hoping that that continues as we're going through the zoning process right now. So that we can build this community and show Atlanta and the rest of the country what a gorgeous thing a tiny house community can be and all the benefits that it can bring to a larger community and to the individuals that live there. So this is our preliminary site plan. Again, it's rough. We're in the zoning process right now. But one of the big things that we've been learning through this process is when you're working with such small spaces, is every inch counts. And the land that we're working with is really shaping how we're building this community. We've been really fortunate to find a property that has a lot of really gorgeous old hardwoods, and we're maintaining those, designing the community around them in a low-lying area. They're going to have a walking path through it. So again, just thinking out how do we lay this out to fit into the community and be a part of it, but also have a little bit of privacy. So we've kind of modeled our lots, and again, this is not necessarily the best reflection because you can't see how the landscaping around the houses is going to be, but we'll have little hamlets, clusters of houses, kind of like you might have seen if you've gone to Seaside, Florida, or Serenbe, where they're close together, so you're part of this group and you are close to your neighbors, but then you have a little bit of privacy also. And anyway, it's just been a great learning experience for us. Again, we're in the zoning process right now. What we're trying to do is go through existing codes without rewriting ordinances and showing people with an existing ordinance that this can be done. And we're really positive about it. And I think that's all I have to say at this point. Rambling.
So just to give you, I know this is conceptual, but just to give you, and I'm sorry if you can't see it very well in the back. So you've got 2 entries to this property. Here would be all of the houses laid out. We've got community garden, for those people who want to keep gardening. We've got our community center. So those are the 2 positives, those are 2 attributes to this community that allows people, I think we did put a pool in. We put a pool in. We put a pool in. But that's conceptual. I don't know if we're going to do a pool or not. But why not a pool? So, but the whole thing is to, like Kim said, the whole process has been fantastic, and it's been the network of the tiny housers, you all in this room. We reached out. We said, hey, we're thinking of doing this tiny house community. Anyone know of some land? Boom. That same day, we found this property. I believe Mike Barnes from East Point sent it to me via Facebook. So again, it takes a village. We need all of you to be a part of this. So if you're in a different area, talk to your planning and zoning. You never know what might become, what might happen. So other attributes to this, again, between, I think we said, what was the number of houses? Yeah. 40 to 50 houses on 7.6 acres. But of course, like Kim said, we want to maintain a lot of the natural hardwoods, be able to create some gathering spaces, but also create that privacy of your own house. And so it's been amazing how this project has evolved. The city of East Point, we sat down with the mayor. I mean, they're excited. They're behind us. They're supporting us. But again, we want to make sure we're following the rules. We want to make sure we don't have to have variances if we don't need to. And we have some experts like Jim. Jim, wave your hand. Jim's right there, of Jim Chapman Properties. We're very happy to have an expert like Jim to partner with to see this to completion. Now again, like Kim said, we are in the zoning process. You know, things might completely change, but we are very hopeful that this does move forward. So what I'd like to do now, we're just going to stand up and we're going to just talk about some of the challenges or just kind of obstacles that we've had and just in general. So Jeremy, I'd like you to come up and just kind of speak to any type of issues, or I don't even want to say, let's say opportunities, as Elizabeth said, that you are able to educate.
So I think a lot of places, and it sounds like in Atlanta you guys have this issue, is the minimum building restriction. So that can either be at the like the city level, it can be at neighborhood organization level, HOAs, and that can even be at, you know, if someone sells you a piece of property, they can put a covenant on it that says, you know, you can only build this size. If you're not careful, you can have that issue as well. And so that's different everywhere you go. In Chattanooga, that's actually not an issue. You can build on a permanent foundation down to 152 square feet in Chattanooga, which is amazing. So there's plenty of space up there. Come join us. Anyways, and so that's not the hurdle that I'm trying to address, because in Chattanooga you can already do that. There's some lot size challenges that I'd like to see addressed, in terms of I'd like to see you be able to subdivide things down to very small lots that you can sell on a fee simple basis. But that's sort of different conversation. The challenges I'm trying to address is the tiny house on wheels challenges that we have in Chattanooga, because we already passed the hurdle of, can you build really tiny on a permanent foundation? Yes, you can in Chattanooga. But there's a lot of people, you know, we get probably at least 1 to 2 emails a day, people reaching out to, you know, Wind River Tiny Homes, you know, have a tiny house, or I want a tiny house, but I want to know where I can put it. Where can I put my tiny house on wheels? Where is it legal? It's the biggest question that we get on a day-to-day basis, is where do I put my tiny house on wheels? And so to me, that's the need I want to address. And it's going to take setting precedents in places that are open to the idea, you know, such as Chattanooga. And you know, there's going to be things that we do, you know, when we eventually get this tiny house on wheels community done, there's going to be things that we do poorly, and then we'll learn from this pilot community, and then we'll be able to do a better community, you know, and then eventually we'll have it all sorted out, and there'll be a really good template that anyone can basically replicate, you know, in the country. And specifically with the tiny house on wheels thing, the challenge is that you know, there's just a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of just, you know, people really don't know what they are. So city officials maybe think they're a mobile house or a modular house, you know, that's regulated by HUD, and they're not, because tiny houses, a mobile house has to be, I believe, 400 square feet or bigger by HUD standards. There's almost no tiny houses on wheels that are that size. They're all smaller than that, pretty much. So that you know, you can't categorize it as that and have it regulated by HUD. It's not an RV either, because of, you know, as mentioned before, RVs are explicitly not permanent residences. They're explicitly 90 days or less most places. And also, if you want to get technical, the construction practices used to build a tiny house are completely different than the construction practices used to build an RV or a park model. So anyways, that's sort of the challenge, is educating city officials, building codes people, and zoning codes officials to really what tiny houses are, what makes them different. I'm speaking of tiny houses on wheels, what they are, what makes them different than an RV, what makes them different from a mobile home, and where can they fit in the fabric of the city in a way that, from an urban design perspective, makes sense.
Kim doesn't want to say anything. I did forget, sorry, I did get ahead of myself, so let's do next slide real quick. So I forgot to show some of the models. So with the cluster of tiny homes, They're going to be, I don't want to say themes, but different areas that have different styles. So this is conceptually designed style of one of the tiny houses. Let's show one more. And then I think one more. Is there one more? Do I have one more? That's it. Okay. So again, too, we're putting more thought into just saying we're going to build a neighborhood. You know, there's a lot more thought, the layout, the placement, how even with what Jeremy's doing, I'm sure he's not thinking not just lining up like a trailer park. How do you place a tiny house on wheels in a way, in a cluster that still promotes or helps contribute to community? You can't, I don't know if lining up is the best thing, or is it a circle? I mean, often you can see a giant U of tiny houses out in the field. But that's the type of stuff that we're starting to learn about. Also, quick survey. Who's tiny house on wheels? Tiny house on wheels? Okay, tiny house on foundation? Very cool. And what is everyone else here for? Who's just excited to be here? Okay, everybody, good. All right, so actually, to put a note too, we are doing a survey. It will pop up at the end of it, don't worry, but the whole thing is we need to know what you want. This is what we're fighting for. This is what we're trying to educate people on. So if you want tiny houses on wheels in a neighborhood, we need to know that. It's same with this foundation, and also what size of square footage. A previous survey that we did, we found that tiny house Atlanta goers that want to live in the city, majority of them was 40% want to live on foundation between 400 to 600 square feet. So that seems to be the nice go-to size for on foundation tiny homes. As far as what do you see as a normal standard for tiny houses on wheels? Is it 180 or?
I'd say the people that come to us in general are wanting the most common size request we get is 24 long by 8.5 wide, which works out just around 200 square feet.
With loft space, and then add the loft space.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. So, again, we do need to know what exactly you want. Square footage, where you want to park it. Do you want to be urban? Do you want to be rural? This is all part of it. You can go ahead. Is it the? Perfect. So there's the survey. So, Kim, would you like to say anything else? Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So one thing that just comes up is, again, back to that community idea. I think anyone who's going to come live in a community, either on wheels or on foundation, they're going to want to be involved in the community, and that's such a big influencing factor of what we're doing here is bringing back that involvement and having community set meetings and activities so you can get to know your neighbors and not feel bad for talking to them as you're walking by them. So just really focusing on that interaction. It's such a huge conversation, and I know we're talking about so many different topics here. We're going to open it up for questions in just a minute, but I just want to influence that, emphasize that. Horrible. Emphasize that it's really about that interaction, and so this is so much deeper than just tiny houses. The structure is a mechanism, a vehicle for having these conversations, but it goes so much deeper than just micro-housing.
So public service announcement, we have a child looking for their payment in this room. Noah Carter. Mom, Dad, you here? Noah Carter. Noah Carter's looking for their parents.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi, I will try again.
Good luck, Noah. I'm sure they're here. Probably in a tiny house. All right.
Okay, just two more things popped into my head as people are talking. I'm a little slow, so sometimes it takes, a while. Yeah, exactly, the blood flow takes a while. The atmosphere is a little thinner. So one of them being a challenge for a permanent foundation. We built 2 permanent foundation tiny houses, and my background is residential construction, permanent foundation. So the one challenge that we're running into right now, actually, we have a client that he's trying to get financing for us to build him a permanent foundation tiny home, 440 square feet. custom, a lot of high-end finishes. And a challenge that he's running into, which I would think that you would find that anywhere where you started doing this, is comps. So if you're familiar with real estate, how they determine how much they can loan you, or one of the ways they determine how much they'll loan you is finding comps in the area. And quite honestly, Wind River Tiny Homes is building its own comps right now, and it's probably going to be that way for the next couple years. So that's one thing I just want you guys to be aware of and think about. Is if you know of a place that already has smaller houses, you're going to find a much easier time finding comps and being able to get financing for that house. Because quite frankly, if you build it in a place where there's not any other houses that are even close to that square footage, they're just not going to know how to price it. They're going to have to expand. Normally it's within a mile. They'll expand that to 2 miles, and won't find anything in 2 miles. They'll keep expanding it. And what they'll eventually find is going to be something that's not really similar to what you're trying to build in most cases. So that's one thing. And the other thing, I just wanted to tell you where I'm at right now in Chattanooga. On August 8th, I'm presenting to the Planning Commission to make a formal request for Chattanooga's RPA, which I've been working with, to develop a tiny house zoning tool that would essentially legalize tiny houses as their own separate zoning category. So anyways, we'll see. Fingers crossed. If you're religious, throw up some prayers on August 8th. But that's the plan, and I think that's really where we need to be at with tiny houses on wheels. There needs to be separate zoning. They need to be treated as tiny houses on wheels, not as RVs, and not as other types of structures, because they're materially different and they fit differently into a community than anything that we currently have. So, anyways,
And for questions, so I can have you say it, if you would like to gather on the left or the right, and then I'll come to you. But also, if you want to know more about our East Point, Eco Cottages at East Point, there is a booth right next to the Escape Traveler on the far side of the festival. So you can talk to Mary in person about the East Point community. You popped up quickly.
So this is my first introduction to the concept of tiny houses. I've seen the shows on TV, but and so I'm wondering if a person, I like the idea of the simpler living and that, but if we're a couple, we have 2 cars, and our basically footprint that we have with the car space that we would need would be bigger than the house. So how do you deal with that?
So the question is, footprint, because another zoning and codes is that you do have to have parking for your building on foundation. So one thing is that is a positive to where we're building ours is it's a quarter of a mile from MARTA. So we're trying to open up the idea of utilizing mass transit more than having a car. We are creating parking spaces, but we're also creating parking spaces on the outside perimeter of the neighborhood. So it's not right next, not all of them are this way, but not all the parking spaces are right next to your house. But you do have to have a certain amount of parking per houses on that lot. Kim, do you want to say anything?
So I think just in general, that would be maybe something to, if you're going to go tiny, as the shows like to say, it's going to be a lifestyle change, just to be quite honest with you. Unless you've been living in something that's 400 square feet, if you're going permanent foundation, or 600 square feet, it's going to be an adjustment, and there's going to be multiple areas of your life that you're going to either need to adjust or you're going to have to adjust to be able to live. And I can say from personal experience, I come from, I grew up in a large house. My dad is a doctor, had a really big house, and I don't know if this is rebellion or what it is, but living in 276 square feet, I'm not any less happy. I'm not, my health is not suffering. If anything, I can point to several areas in my life that it's improved relationships and it's made my life better. So I just say that to you, change is a double-edged sword, and there's some things that you'll have to give up that you might not want to, but then there's other things that you'll get in return. So.
My question is for you. The village in East Point is the 400 and 600 square foot. Is that the footprint or is that the actual living area?
We are looking at models starting at 300 square feet, going up to 700. So you will have a variety of options to choose from. So you'll be able to exactly that. You'll have the smaller models to the larger models for maybe families.
Is that the footprint on the lot or is that the 2 stories living space?
Footprint. Back to the other side. I'll be back. I should have worn a Fitbit today.
Okay, so my question is for Jeremy. As you're navigating Chattanooga's openness to tiny houses on wheels, how can we follow your journey so that we can continue to use what you're doing to help us get further here in the Atlanta area?
Excellent question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Currently, probably the best way, I haven't been great about this up till this point, but maybe I'll start getting better at it, is, you can follow Wind River Tiny Homes on Facebook, Twitter, I'm really terrible at updating, but Instagram and Facebook are fairly regularly updated. Huh? Oh, okay, yeah, I should talk to Will about how to get better at social media. Anyways, that's the best way, and I'm toying with the idea of starting a personal blog that's more like advocacy based and more like tiny house knowledge based. Because like being someone who's like voraciously researched this stuff, I just have so much like up here that I'm speaking, I'm not best at getting it out sometimes, but writing I can do a fairly good job at that. So if you follow us on Wind River, I would make the announcement on Wind River's Facebook page when I did open a personal blog up, and you could follow it that way.
And I'd like to also say Tiny House Atlanta is redoing its website right now, so you may notice there's not all that much information on it, but what we're working on is cataloging any other communities that come up in Georgia or nearby in the southeast. Any developments, we'll try to share them with you. We're also putting together a zoning database. So follow our website, tinyhouseatlanta.com, and probably in the next month or two, we'll have a new site up that will have a lot more information. We'll just continue to add to it. So it'll be a great resource for the Atlanta metro area and other parts of Georgia to just learn more and stay involved with us. And of course, come to our meetups and learn as much as you like.
I'll be back.
Hi. As I'm thinking about your cottages in East Point and I guess wherever tiny houses around the world and around the States, something that I'm concerned about, and I mentioned it to a lady I was sitting with. I live in a subdivision in here in Atlanta, and when I moved to the subdivision, I thought I would have a community, family, children playing together, that kind of a thing. Instead, what I have, and I notice, I'm sure you could relate, is houses that are together, you pay an HOA fee, and everybody drives into their garage, and you never see your neighbors except when they're mowing their lawns, hi, and that's it. So in saying that, when you're having, what's going to make it different from a subdivision, and how would you choose the people in terms of, I'm not talking ethnicity, I'm talking, what was that, basically common interests. Like if I do pottery, am I going to have people from different ethnicities who love to do pottery? And so, yeah, this is a community of people who love to do pottery and make jewelry and, whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? Do fencing.
Exactly.
How are you gonna weed out people or weed in people or plant people?
So I'll start, I'm sure we all have comments on this. The big thing is that there's a lot of like-minded people that want to live this lifestyle first. So also, you're living in less than 500 square feet. You don't have your media rooms. You don't have the space that lets you just stay in your house all day. It pushes you outside. And to be able to have a community center, a community garden, you know, again, we see many more of these being developed. So we're not going to just say this is going to be an artist community. No, even though there are artist communities in the works with other groups to inspire or let people be able to have the potential and save the money to be able to follow their passion. But for our community, first it's going to start with like-minded individuals. Not everyone, as people say, I love it when people say, I could never live in a tiny house. I'm like, great, don't. That is an option. In fact, you have better options right now to not live in a tiny house than live in a tiny house. So we've got that working for us. But there are a number of people who want to live this way. It also is proven that we want a diverse group of people, income range. We don't want one group. We don't want just retirees. We don't want just millennials. I could only imagine the parties that go on if it was just millennials. Or the lack thereof. I guess they're pretty quiet nowadays. But, so it's the whole idea of being able to offer, and again, you know, selling real estate, if it goes through, it goes through. But also, this is in the beginning. These are questions that we're asking ourselves. And I'm gonna keep talking, so I'm gonna hand it off to Jeremy or Kim that want to comment on any of this.
Yes. Would love to comment. So to speak to the living in a tiny house, yeah, so living in 276 square feet is materially different than living, I don't have a garage, my deck is the same size as my house. So half of my life is lived on my deck, and I'm sort of, my house is in a rural location, undisclosed, top secret facility, no. Just outside of Chattanooga, and I'm in an unincorporated county in Tennessee, which the laws are incredibly lax in terms of what you can live in a travel trailer in an RV if I wanted to. And so mine's classified as an RV, and that's how I'm doing it legally. So anyways, and we have like a couple friends that own their own tiny houses that live with us in community on this little. We didn't really set out to do that; it just kind of happened. And I would say that you'll find that that's how communities are going to be formed. As the laws open up and people are allowed to do these things, the pieces will sort of fall where they may. And by the nature of a tiny house, it ends up being a more diverse and a more inclusive feeling community because I can't hide. If someone knocks on my door, I can't go hide in another room. Like Jeremy, I see you. You're sitting on your couch right there. So I would consider myself an introvert. And so, I like my private time. I like being away from people sometimes. But I also recognize that I'm the healthiest when I am living in a community, provided I can have a couple hours to myself, every day. But I'm healthier and a happier person. And I think this is not a new concept. Like in America, we always think we're inventing the wheel when we're really just reinventing the fourth or fifth version of the wheel. In Europe, this has been done for a long time. In Southeast Asia, in China, in places where space is already a problem, this is done regularly. And so we don't really have to invent this stuff. We can just kind of see what's been done and do the things that make sense.
Actually, I want to talk this time. Okay, so one thing that you could do, and we're not doing this in East Point. It's a new community, so we don't really to do it. But in New York, they a lot of times do co-ops. And so what that means is anyone who wants to move into the neighborhood has to be approved by everybody else who lives in the co-op. So that's one way where you can vote on who's coming in and who's not. I personally don't think that that's necessary. The response that we've had so far to our community, I think people are relieved to be able to know that, hey, you're not the weirdo when you say hi to your neighbor. You're not the weirdo when you go, knock on their door. And I live in an apartment complex with, hundreds of people, and I never see anybody. And I say hi to them, and I introduce myself, and I'm like this weird person. People look at me like a crazy person, but I think they probably feel intimidated too. And a lot of times, when I do that, I actually get a really nice response. At first, they're what's happening? Just because it's so odd. But then once you break through that awkwardness, people are relieved to be able to get to know you and really get to start that relationship. So I think just setting this precedent in this community that it's okay and it's expected. is going to make it so much easier where we don't feel embarrassed and we don't let our pride get in the way. And we tear these boundaries down, these physical, emotional, hypothetical boundaries, and we really open up and we really start to get to know each other. And we open that fortress. We don't live in our little tiny fortress. I was talking to a lady earlier today about the community. I was like, if you want to live in a tiny fortress and not know your neighbors, this is not the place for you. We really want to know that. So, all right, that's all. I think we're gonna.
So, who knows who Jay Schaefer is, read of him or know who he is? Jay Schaefer, kind of modern. If you don't know who Jay Schaefer is and you're here, you should go home and Google him. He's sort of the godfather of the modern tiny house movement, or at least he's credited with that. And I've never met him. I'd like to meet him. It seems like he's got a lot of cool ideas. His community concept, which I don't know where he's at with that, I thought was really funny and I think very, very true to the type of people that are drawn to tiny house living, and especially living in community. It's called the working title is the Napoleon Complex, and the tagline is co-housing for the antisocial. So.
Hi, okay. My name is Margie, and I'm also a real estate agent that's working right now with a developer we're in the process of looking for property. And when I heard about the East Point, I was very interested. I talked to you at the booth. It's exciting to see that people are already going through the motions of what we're trying to kind of uncover right now for the folks I'm working with a communal organic garden. I like it to a small scale, something that we've seen in the East Lake area before. My question is, how will you combat in East Point, because I own property there and live right across from, at one time, from where the land you're talking about. So how do you combat a neighborhood that is fairly dense township of houses close together, but the comps right now, there's houses still selling at, houses that are 900 to 1,200 square feet, sell for under 100,000, just purchased one for 65,000 for someone, 2 months ago. And 2 blocks away, you're gonna try to get 150 to 200 for newly marked, smaller scale lot land, lots. So I just don't know. I mean, I understand the motivation to be in a tiny house. We're working towards that with people too. But I don't know how you, one, get the comps, and then 2, talk to people that want tiny, but they see right across the street for half as much and a little bigger.
Yeah, great question. We're dealing with that a lot right now. So comps, first question. We have some buyers, including myself, who will be purchasing the first houses with cash to set comps for the neighborhood, so then other buyers can come in and there will be comps and they can get traditional financing. So there will be cash buyers and that will set the comps. Now the question about the other properties being lower in value, they're not comps. They're just not. It's another animal. So when we have a lender, PNC Bank, who's a vendor here, we've been talking with them. They understand the tiny house movement. They have understood that, hey, we can loan on this. It's not a problem. We've talked with some other banks as well, and they're a little confused about tiny houses, if they can lend on them or not. So that's not an issue. I think what we're selling here is not just the real estate. We're selling the community. So it's brand new construction, which in East Point there's not much of, so that's one thing. So it's different in that regard. And I think people want to buy into, I want to buy into a community where I know my neighbor's name. I want to buy into a community where I don't feel like an outsider. So that's a lot of what we're selling, and that's what I'm personally trying to buy by living in that community myself. So I don't know if that answers everything, but I think we're short on time. So.
All right, I'm sorry guys, but I gotta do one more question on this side.
Hi, I love this concept. I think it's great. My daughter is a disabled veteran. It's her dream to live in a tiny home. When she got off active duty, she found herself homeless, and this is her goal, but it's a little out of her reach right now? Do you know any organizations which may be working with veterans to help get them into tiny homes?
Jeremy, do you know any veteran or any groups that are helping veterans or people to get into tiny houses? They're there. I know there are. It's again having to do a little research. I've had groups reach out to me, but I don't know specific groups that have said we are building tiny homes for homeless vets. And when I say tiny homes, I guess I'm thinking on wheels, or is she wanting a foundational?
She'd like to be integrated into
Oh,
regular.
you have an answer. All right, come here.
We actually have a small group of homeschool families who are getting together that are going to be building a tiny house over the next year. We are connected with a guy in Kansas City, Missouri, so it's not here. A guy in Kansas, or a few guys in Kansas City, Missouri have a community called Veterans Community Project. And they are getting grants for their own salaries, but any donations that are made either in kind or financial go right to the projects. So they have a 5-acre plot of land that the city actually gave to them for $500. The city's also providing infrastructure for water and sewer, electricity, as a donation. They've got some land across the street that they'll eventually develop. Those 5 acres are planned for 52 tiny homes that will be on a foundation for about 240 square feet. And they are specifically for veterans because the guys who founded this organization are wounded warriors themselves. And so they're trying to help this community of homeless veterans. And the reason that they're homeless is because they don't know how to get the resources that they need. They don't know how to get connected. And so this organization is helping them get connected with the resources and also with the houses that will fit them just right.
Perfect. Thank you. And if anyone has any other information, please feel free to reach out to us. Will@tinyhouseatlanta.com. You can find us on the website. Please send us any information that you know, and we'll put it on the website. Thank you so much, Jeremy Weaver. Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much for listening. The next speakers are Adrian Simpson and Katie Permbetti from Atlanta Regional Commission and We Move. Smooth Move. Sorry. I'm so sorry, Adrian. So that starts at 4:30. Thanks so much.